$139.4 trillion. That is the total debt load carried by the United States government as of this summer. But the raw number is not the warning signal. The warning signal is the velocity. That debt is compounding at $17.4 billion every single day, $38 million an hour, $85,000 every passing second. The cost of simply servicing what has already been borrowed, just the interest payments, has now crossed $1 trillion a year. That single line item is now larger than the entire budget for Medicare. It exceeds what Washington spends on Veterans Affairs, education, and Homeland Security combined. For the first time in modern history, the federal government is spending more money financing its past than investing in its future. And that $1 trillion annual interest drag does not disperse evenly across the country. It concentrates. It finds the structural fractures in state budgets and pulls them apart. Economic growth has already downshifted from 2.1% in the first quarter of 2026 to 1.5% in the second. When a broader slowdown hits, it will not distribute the damage equally. Some state balance sheets will bend, others will break, and a specific group of 21 states is already so structurally compromised that a recession will not be the cause of their collapse, it will simply be the autopsy. Assessing that vulnerability comes down to three measurable forces: the Fragility Index. First is concentration risk, how dependent a state is on a narrow cluster of volatile industries. Second is fiscal elasticity, how rapidly tax revenues vanish the moment consumer behavior shifts. Third is exit velocity, how fast capital, employers, and high-income taxpayers are actively pulling out. When all three collide, the result is not a temporary deficit. It is structural failure. Number 21, Michigan. The state that built the American middle class is losing its grip on the industrial engine that created it. Manufacturing still generates roughly 18% of Michigan's GDP, and the automotive sector supports over 170,000 direct jobs. Yet that industry is navigating the most capital-intensive transition in its history. Electric vehicles require fundamentally fewer parts, fewer suppliers, and fewer assembly workers per unit. As Detroit's Big Three execute sweeping restructurings, the fallout lands immediately on factory towns like Flint and Saginaw. Detroit has already lost more than half its population since 1970, still carrying legacy costs from the municipal bankruptcy it exited in 2014. Median household income hovers near $69,000, trailing the national average, while auto and property insurance premiums rank among the highest in the country. Michigan is not fragile because it lacks wealth. It is fragile because its entire economy is tied to an industry aggressively rewriting its own labor math. Number 20, Oregon. Oregon operates with zero sales tax, meaning personal income taxes fund approximately 68% of its general fund. It is one of the most elastic, volatile revenue mechanisms in the nation. When personal incomes contract, Oregon's budget experiences an immediate, unbuffered drop. The private sector is already flashing warning signs. Intel, the state's largest private employer, has eliminated thousands of positions. Nike has trimmed its corporate workforce. Downtown Portland's commercial office vacancy has surged past 30%, dragging assessed property values down with it. Beneath that revenue drop lies roughly $28 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, with mandatory state contributions continuing to rise. After decades of inward migration, Oregon has now posted consecutive years of net population loss. When an income tax-dependent state loses both its high-wage tech jobs and its taxable residents simultaneously, the revenue floor gives out. Number 19, Connecticut. Connecticut presents one of the highest median incomes in America, alongside one of the most dangerous debt loads. Combined state debt, unfunded pensions, and retiree healthcare liabilities exceed $85 billion, one of the heaviest per capita obligations in the nation. The state's tax base is hyper-concentrated in a small pocket of top earners in Fairfield County. When capital markets slide, Connecticut's tax collections drop off a shelf. Commercial office vacancy in Hartford exceeds 20%. Overall population growth has remained stagnant for 20 years, and affluent residents are steadily relocating to zero-income tax states like Florida. Connecticut's crisis is not an absence of capital. It is that its capital is mobile, while its $85 billion liability is completely fixed. Number 18, New Mexico. Roughly one-third of New Mexico's entire general fund revenue is generated by oil and natural gas production, centered in the Permian Basin. That single dependency dictates the state's entire fiscal reality. When energy prices surge, the legislature spends the resulting windfalls. When prices retreat, the budget immediately contracts. Median household income sits near $62,000, while the poverty rate hovers close to 18%. Adding to that vulnerability, approximately 1 out of every 4 jobs in the state is tied directly or indirectly to federal spending, anchored by major national laboratories at Los Alamos and Sandia. Any federal spending restraint impacts New Mexico with compounding force. Factor in escalating water stress across the Rio Grande Basin, and you have an economy resting on 2 variables it cannot control: global commodity prices and congressional appropriations. That is not an economy. That is a bet placed on someone else's table. Number 17. West Virginia. For more than a century, West Virginia's balance sheet was defined by coal. But coal production has dropped by more than half since 2008, causing severance tax collections to swing by hundreds of millions of dollars from year to year. The state's labor force participation rate sits near 55%, the lowest in the United States. West Virginia has suffered net population loss nearly every year since 2012, with working age and younger residents driving the exodus. Median household income is approximately $56,000. Yet, this population of fewer than 1.8 million people is burdened with over $10 billion in combined pension and retiree healthcare liabilities. West Virginia is not waiting for a recession to expose its fragility. A recession merely strips away the final layer of margin. Number 16. Kentucky. Kentucky faces some of the most critical pension deficits in the country. The state's primary retirement system for non-hazardous public employees has at times seen its funded ratio plunge below 20%, leaving virtually no buffer against market downturns. Mandatory state pension contributions now actively crowd out funding for public education, infrastructure maintenance, and emergency services. Meanwhile, the real economy is heavily tied to manufacturing and freight logistics. Assembly plants in Louisville, Georgetown, and Bowling Green link state revenues directly to automotive demand and shifting tariff structures, while the massive UPS Worldport hub in Louisville turns freight volumes into an immediate proxy for national consumer spending. With nearly 16% of residents living below the poverty line, a simultaneous drop in manufacturing and shipping crushes state revenue from both directions, while the fixed pension obligations remain due in full. Number 15. Washington. On the surface, Washington presents a picture of immense corporate power: the Seattle skyline, Microsoft, Amazon, and Boeing, paired with a high median household income of $97,000. Yet that headline wealth masks a fragile structure. Median home prices across the Seattle metropolitan area hover around $790,000, consuming disposable income after taxes, housing, and healthcare. Furthermore, Washington's economic engine is far narrower than it appears: technology, aerospace, and commercial shipping. Microsoft, Amazon, and Boeing alone account for more than 400,000 workers. As all 3 giants trim corporate headcounts, pause hiring, and offshore operations, even a 10% contraction translates to 40,000 lost jobs. Because Washington has no personal income tax and relies overwhelmingly on consumer sales tax, every percentage point drop in retail spending immediately strips hundreds of millions of dollars from state coffers. It is a house of cards waiting for the wind. Number 14. Alaska. With a population of just 730,000, Alaska relies on a single commodity, oil, for approximately 85% of its state revenue. When crude prices dropped below $40 a barrel in 2020, the state lost nearly $1.5 billion in tax receipts in a matter of months. As global energy demand softens and capital shifts toward alternative sources, Alaska faces a structural revenue shortfall that cyclical price spikes cannot repair. In Anchorage, grocery costs run 35% above the national average, and home heating expenses have jumped 28% year over year. Alaska has now logged 6 consecutive years of net population decline, while its statutory constitutional budget reserve, a rainy day fund once exceeding $17 billion, has been drawn down to under $3 billion. It is a state exceptionally rich in natural resources that can no longer fund its basic public obligations. Number 13. Louisiana. Louisiana produces approximately 10% of the nation's total energy supply, yet its residents see little of that structural wealth. The median household income sits near $57,000, with nearly 18% of the population living below the poverty line, while outstanding state debt has climbed past $20 billion. The state's traditional economic base is eroding, with more than 12,000 oil and gas jobs vanishing between 2020 and 2024. But the most severe structural accelerator is environmental exposure. Hurricane Ida alone inflicted an estimated $75 billion in economic damage, while coastal erosion claims the equivalent of one football field of land every 100 minutes. In response, private property insurance premiums have surged 63% over a 3-year span. Louisiana is not approaching a fiscal emergency. It is actively managing one while attempting to absorb rising structural costs. Number 12. Arizona. Once heralded as the premier engine of Sunbelt expansion, with a population exceeding 7.5 million, Arizona's growth has run straight into structural cost limits. The median home price in Phoenix has surged to roughly $435,000, up 60% since 2019, while real wages have remained flat and mortgage rates hold above 7%. Foreclosure filings have climbed 45% year over year. Compounding the housing squeeze is a resource bottleneck. 36% of Arizona's water supply is drawn from the Colorado River. Federally mandated water reductions in 2025 have already eliminated an estimated $1.3 billion in agricultural revenue. At the same time, Intel has pulled back on semiconductor expansion plans. Residential building permits have plunged 41% since 2022, and net inward migration is decelerating for the first time in a decade. Arizona's expansion model is hitting an immovable wall of drought, borrowing costs, and evaporating affordability. Number 11. New Jersey. On paper, New Jersey ranks among the wealthiest states in the nation. In reality, it carries one of the most severe debt overhangs in state history. Total public debt has ballooned past $240 billion, amounting to more than $26,000 for every single resident. Property taxes average nearly $9,800 annually. The state relies heavily on finance, pharmaceuticals, and commercial real estate sectors that retrench violently during economic contractions. Office vacancy rates across Newark and Jersey City have pushed past 25%. Unfunded pension liabilities exceed $95 billion. Over 40% of state roadway infrastructure is rated in poor condition, and wealth continues to migrate outward. The divide between New Jersey's tax receipts and its long-term obligations is widening into a fiscal canyon. Number 10. Indiana. Manufacturing drives nearly 27% of Indiana's gross domestic product, representing one of the highest industrial concentrations in the nation. In 2024 alone, the state lost 18,000 manufacturing positions, with projections indicating another 40,000 jobs could disappear in a broader downturn. Production facilities in Kokomo, Fort Wayne, and Lafayette remain exposed to international trade shifts and supply chains running directly through China and Mexico. As trade volatility persists, industrial centers could see regional unemployment spike past 9%. Concurrently, home prices have jumped 35% since 2020, while wage growth stalled, and utility and grocery expenses climbed 19% over 2 years. Indiana's low-cost manufacturing model is transforming into a primary structural vulnerability. Number 9. Texas. Promoted as an insulated, recession-proof juggernaut, Texas's $2.8 trillion economy rests on 3 volatile foundations: energy, technology, and real estate. Oil production alone accounts for nearly 15% of state GDP, yet crude prices dropping from approximately $110 to $78 a barrel have stripped billions from revenue projections. Statewide median home prices have risen 45% since 2019, but demand is fracturing. Home sales in Austin are down nearly 40%, while active inventory surged 78% in a single year. Furthermore, public infrastructure is straining, under the arrival of roughly 1,200 new residents per day. The 2021 electrical grid failure inflicted an estimated $130 billion in economic losses, and grid stability remains fragile. If statewide unemployment rises to just 6%, over 400,000 jobs would vanish within months. The concept of an invulnerable Texas economy is coming apart under real math. Number 8. Nevada. Nearly 30% of Nevada's GDP is anchored in leisure, hospitality, and gaming, overwhelmingly concentrated along the Las Vegas Strip. When American consumers reduce discretionary spending on entertainment and travel, Nevada unravels with unmatched speed. During the 2020 downturn, statewide unemployment spiked to 28.2%, the highest mark in modern American history. The warning indicators are resurfacing. Hotel occupancy has slipped 12%, gaming revenue has dropped 8%, and the casino sector supports over 350,000 direct workers. The state maintains one of the highest foreclosure rates in the country, while in Reno, median home prices near $565,000 have priced out households earning under $90,000. When tourist traffic recedes, state revenues drop instantly, exposing the structural fault lines beneath the desert. Number 7. Hawaii. Tourism powers nearly 25% of Hawaii's entire economy. When travel stopped in 2020, visitor arrivals collapsed 75%, driving unemployment to 22%, the second highest rate recorded in the nation. That revenue stream is faltering once again. Average hotel rates in Honolulu exceed $380 per night, pushing the cost of an average family visit above $8,000 and driving tourism receipts down 11% this year. On Oahu, the median home price has climbed past $1.1 million. Residents face grocery costs 67% above the national baseline and electricity rate hikes of 22% in a single year. Hawaii has now recorded 6 consecutive years of net population loss while importing over 85% of the goods it consumes. That is not an economy. That is an isolated supply chain carrying extreme systemic risk. Number 6. New York. A $2.6 trillion economy anchored by Wall Street, commercial real estate, and corporate services. The vulnerability here is extreme fiscal sensitivity. A mere 10% drop in financial sector earnings erases roughly $6 billion in state tax revenue overnight. That stress is already hammering the municipal balance sheet. Manhattan office vacancy has climbed to 21%, its highest level since 1994, while commercial property values have plunged nearly 30% in core districts, destabilizing New York City's $60 billion property tax base. Median monthly rent has reached $4,200, forcing more than 40% of residents to spend over half their income on housing. Since 2020, more than 650,000 residents have left the state. Behind them sits roughly $390 billion in combined debt and unfunded pension obligations exceeding $300 billion. It is a compounding structural shortfall. Number 5. Delaware. With fewer than 1 million residents, Delaware is home to more than 60% of Fortune 500 corporate registrations, yet almost none of these entities maintain physical operations within the state. Corporate filing fees and franchise taxes fund approximately 41% of total state revenue. If corporate balance sheets contract, Delaware takes an immediate blow. During the 2008 financial crisis, business entity filings collapsed 38% in 12 months. A standard downturn could strip up to $11.5 billion from the state's fiscal projections. With a total labor pool of just 500,000 workers, even a 2% employment drop wipes out 10,000 jobs, the economic equivalent of erasing an entire municipality. Delaware's absolute reliance on paper incorporation makes it exceptionally exposed to corporate contraction. Number 4. Maryland. Maryland boasts a median household income above $98,000, ranking among the wealthiest states in the country. Yet that affluence is concentrated around the Washington, D.C. metropolitan corridor, where nearly 30% of all jobs depend directly or indirectly on federal appropriations. As federal budget tightening takes hold, Maryland absorbs the shock instantly. Outstanding state debt has surpassed $40 billion, with mandatory pension liabilities projected to climb another $5 billion by 2026. Median home prices have reached $445,000, while average mortgage payments surged 38% over 2 years. Baltimore has lost more than 20,000 residents since 2020, and commercial downtown vacancy sits above 28%. Maryland's affluence masks a state tethered to a single federal employer, actively trimming operational costs. Number 3. Illinois. Illinois carries approximately $144 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, with a funded ratio sitting at 46%. Standard actuarial benchmarks warn that any retirement system dropping below 40% breaches the point of recovery. If Illinois contributed an additional $1 million every single day toward that deficit, closing the gap would require nearly 600 years. Meanwhile, more than 340,000 residents have left the state since 2020. Corporate cornerstones including Boeing, Citadel, and Tyson Foods have moved operational headquarters out of state. Chicago commercial office vacancy exceeds 23%, and downtown property valuations have dropped 35% since 2019. Illinois holds the lowest credit rating of any state in the nation, sitting just one notch above junk status. A single credit downgrade could effectively cut the state off from affordable public borrowing. Number 2, California. Generating $4.5 trillion as the world's fifth largest economy, California's budget mechanics are fracturing. The state's Legislative Analyst's Office projects budget deficits of $18 billion in fiscal 2026, 2027, and $35 billion by 2027, 2028, following 4 consecutive years of revenue shortfalls. Since 2020, California has recorded a net loss of 450,000 residents. Internal Revenue Service migration data confirms that an estimated $56 billion in taxable income has moved out of the state. Tech anchors including Oracle and Tesla, along with mid-tier enterprise firms, have relocated footprints to Texas, Nevada, and Florida. Silicon Valley has shed over 90,000 positions since 2022. San Francisco office vacancy has reached 36%, and statewide homelessness exceeds 180,000 people. The high-earning taxpayers who built the state's tax receipts are exiting, while the structural expenditures they funded remain behind. Number 1, Florida. Tourism generates roughly 25% of Florida's gross domestic product, but that consumer engine is stalling. In 2025, statewide hotel occupancy dropped 18%, domestic air travel fell 22%, and international visitor traffic plunged nearly 30%. The reliable influx of northern seasonal residents is receding as inflation and local cost pressures make extended stays unaffordable. The critical pressure point is property insurance. Florida's average homeowner premium reached $8,458 in 2026, roughly 2.8 times the national baseline. Since 2017, more than 30 private insurance carriers have left the state, declared insolvency, or halted underwriting. Foreclosure filings have jumped 39%, while rising sea levels threaten an estimated $2.9 trillion in coastal assets. While Florida still absorbs roughly 1,000 new arrivals daily, local transportation, power grids, and water systems are over capacity. Construction, retail, and hospitality, representing over 40% of the workforce, are shedding jobs as living costs outpace the real economy. There is, of course, an opposing case. Optimists point out that recession probability in prediction markets has dropped from 40% down to 17%. Goldman Sachs projects gross domestic product expanding at 2.5%. The Federal Reserve retains room to cut benchmark interest rates. Consumer spending rose 3.2% in the second quarter, buoyed by tax refunds, and property insurance rates in Florida registered their first measurable decline since 2015. None of those data points are fabricated, but they describe a temporary cyclical pause rather than structural stability. The second quarter spending surge was driven by one-time disbursements that have already been absorbed. Gross domestic product growth decelerated from 2.1% in the first quarter to 1.5% in the second, even before international energy markets absorbed fresh escalation in the Middle East. More critically, the Congressional Budget Office projects annual federal net interest payments will double to $2.1 trillion by 2036. That debt service strips Washington of the fiscal latitude required to backstop failing state balance sheets. The pension shortfalls, outmigration flows, commercial vacancies, and infrastructure liabilities eroding these 21 states are not cyclical. They do not dissolve in a routine economic recovery. They compound. Over the coming months, 3 structural developments will define this divide. First, within 12 months, at least 2 of these 21 states face credit rating downgrades severe enough to restrict their access to affordable municipal bond markets. Illinois represents the immediate flashpoint, with New Jersey and Louisiana directly behind it as fixed pension schedules collide with slowing tax receipts. Second, by mid-2027, the economic split between expanding Sunbelt economies and structurally indebted states will become the central political fault line in the country. The debate will center on whether federal infrastructure funding and appropriations should continue flowing to jurisdictions failing to balance their own balance sheets. Third, California's revenue trajectory will force an institutional choice. If the outmigration of high-income taxpayers continues, the state will be pushed to propose explicit wealth or exit taxes, or implement service reductions severe enough to redefine state governance by 2028. Tracking this trajectory comes down to 3 measurable data streams. The monthly Treasury statement. Federal debt service is absorbing roughly $24 billion per week. Net interest currently consumes 14% of total federal outlays. If that figure reaches 16%, it forces fiscal retrenchment across every state in the union. The annual IRS migration reports. When capital flows steadily from California, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey into Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and Nevada, it is not a lifestyle trend. It is the permanent relocation of the American tax base. And household exposure? The property taxes, utility spikes, and insurance premiums quietly arriving on kitchen tables across these 21 jurisdictions. Every major power throughout history operated under the assumption that its fiscal expansion was permanent. In Rome, Britain, and the Ottoman Empire, the structural fractures did not originate at the imperial center. They opened at the margins in regional provinces unable to support their mounting obligations. The question facing the United States is not whether state balance sheets will reach a point of reckoning, but whether that reckoning will be confronted directly before the compounding arithmetic makes the choice for it.